So what's your name and age?
Rick Harris, 72.
So Rick, tell me about how you got into logging.
Well, I had, my wife and I had back in 1976, well, 75, I guess, no, excuse me, 76, December of 76, we quit our jobs and started building this house. And then we ran out of money, had it up pretty well weatherproofed, but we ran out of money in April, so I went looking for work. And I was trying to get on with Simpson's Private Railroad, and they just didn't have any jobs available. And I was in there one day filling out an application, you know, recreating a new application real often, and this guy was calling for chokerman. It was probably mid-April. So I just put chokerman on the application and handed it in, and they put me to work the next Monday up at Camp Govey.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what were you doing up there? Which side were you working on?
So I was on it was a double drum Skagit, and we had two of those. And a buddy of mine, he's really into the yarders. He told me, he says, well, Simpson had those special made, and they were only two made like that, and they were, I forget the numbers, but they were built for Simpson. And I believe this one had a V12 Cummins in it. It was a stout machine, you know, about 100-foot tube, I think, something like that. And so I started out with chokers on, setting chokers there, and then I went to helping the hook tender. So it was called a tail end guy. So he helped the hook tender, and he had been crippled up, and he was, you know, he wasn't in the best shape for doing it anymore. So he taught me everything, and he was very smart. Taught me how to tend hook, and so then every once in a while when he'd be gone, I'd tend hook on the machine, and did that. And then one day, what happened was I was, the chaser was gone. His wife was having a baby. They said, "Well, you're going to chase today," and I never chased on a landing, but how hard can that be, you know? Well, what happened? We had a long stick land there, and I just didn't think anything of it. It was sticking out over the landing about 20 feet, and I thought, well, eventually the second loader, he did the bucking and limbing. He'll come over and buck that long stick, and you know, I think I probably should have done it myself. Went and looked for a saw somewhere, and you know, and done it. But anyway, the yard engineer brought a turn in really fast, and it caught that long stick and just swung it around and swept the landing and got me and put me out of commission for about 8 months. And so when I came back, I said, well, I'd always wanted to drive the log trucks. I love those big off-highway trucks, you know. And so after a few months of tendon hook and doing that stuff again, then I got a bid on a log truck. That's the way it was at camp. Seniority, you bid. If you had the seniority, you'd get the bid. If you didn't, you'd wait till next time. And eventually you'd get, you know, and that's the way it was done. Who had the most whiskers, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and so I got a log truck, and so it was just, you know, spent the rest of my time up there driving truck, you know. And it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that. Camp life was wonderful.
That's cool. So what type of log truck was it that you were driving?
So mostly, when you first started, you got there were like 1963, 64 Kenworth off-highway trucks, 250 Cumminses, self-aspirated, no turbos, 10-foot bunks, and, you know, big off-highway, heavy-duty frames, double-framed, and, you know, I think the tires were like, what were they? They were like, I don't remember what size tires they were, but they were huge, and they were heavy. I mean, to wrestle one tire around was, you know, they were big boys,
wow.
You know. And yeah, big old heavy duty trucks that could really take the punishment, you know. And I mean, you know, if you got into good wood, the boys that put them up there, the load would be 20 feet off the ground, you know.
Wow.
They'd be, one time, Dave Pune, who just retired, by the way, last year. Dave retired, I think it was just last year about this time, and I think he retired with about 51 or 52 years with the company. One time Dave he had nice, oh man, like 3-foot peelers. They were just beautiful, beautiful logs. And he laid them in there, and just, they got to set right up at the tipsy tops of the stakes where they just come out against the stakes and then start building from there. So anyway, this load was like, you know, everything you could do to throw those, we had really long wrappers, of course. Get those wrappers over and get her loaded up. So I start out and I get maybe 200 yards from the landing and I start going around this corner. Well, it's solid rock. They had just cut the rock out of a rock face, but it has supered just slightly towards the the bank, you know. Started around that corner. I was going pretty slow, and all of a sudden she just goes right up against the bank.
No.
I was that tall, you know. I mean, it was like maybe, you know, I don't know, like 2% or something, or 1%. I don't know. It was almost nothing, but it was just right there, and I had to walk back. Hey, Dave, I'm up against the bank. So he came out and took, I don't know, 2 or 3 off, you know, so it settled back down and I could leave, you know.
Oh my gosh. What would you guess those loads weighed on average?
Well, I remember taking one into the sort yard, and if you hauled out on the 800 system, then your logs would go to the sort yard. And we, the stacker operator, they had scales on the stackers. They could actually weigh a load. And he said, and I don't remember it being it wasn't as big as some of the loads I hauled, but it was 150-some thousand pounds, just the load, you know. So about 3 times what the highway trucks were hauling at that time, you know. If you were in good wood, you could do that, but a normal load probably, even if they were in small wood, was probably at least 100,000, you know.
Okay.
Right in there, I would think.
And what type of gearbox did you have in that log truck?
5 and 4, 5 main box, and 4-speed Brownie. Yeah, and I think some of them have a 4-speed main and a 4-speed Brownie, but they all have a 4-speed Brownie, you know. And then once in a while, well, I'd work all the overtime I could, and so if they needed you to push, so our shovels, almost all of them were on rubber tires, you know, and we have these great big Bucyrus shovels, and they'd have 2 drive axles and 2 steer axles, you know.
Sure.
They had a silver 92 for the carrier motor. And so what would happen is we had those big push bumpers on the trucks, you know, big old 1/2-inch steel push bumpers. So they'd take off, and when they'd say, well, go catch up to so-and-so, he's on the such and such road, and push him up the hill. And so you'd just come up against him and start pushing, you know, and give them the help they needed. Wow. Otherwise, they'd be all day trying to climb up those hills, you know. And that was good overtime. But when I did that, quite often the senior driver would get asked first, and he'd say, well, ask Harris, he'll do it, always. So I got to drive his truck, so it had a 350 Cummins in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was hot shit.
Yeah, so you're pretty flash in
hot
that.
shit, yeah.
Wow.
Those are Peterbilts instead of Kenworths. But I remember one time. Now, I will say this about camp. We had a saying. It was Govey and Griswold both. It's a school for the young and a home for the old, and that's the way it was. There were some old boys there that were all crippled up, and they did little things around camp that needed doing. And instead of hiring some high school kid, they'd hire these old guys to do it that had been there all their lives, you know. And then, of course, they bring us kids in that didn't know anything, and always the guys would train you up, and before too long, you knew a lot of stuff too, you know. One of my favorite stories is I had been setting chokers for maybe, I don't know, maybe just a week. And we moved the yarder up to LeBar Pass. And we were towering up, and Bob Stevens, who was our side rod, and just a sweetheart of a guy. Bob just died last year for the month, 96 years old. And Bob says, Rick, he says, go down at the end of the road. They had pushed up a berm, the cat, when they built the road. He says, behind that berm, there's a block. Bring it back up here, you know. Well, I was thinking, a block of wood? You know, that's what I'm looking for, right?
Okay.
They needed a block of wood to sit under the pads of the yard or something. I get back there, and all I could see was this about a 16-inch young block, and it wasn't a lightweight. It was a solid wheel on it, right? And I go back there, and I'm like, I try to pick it up. I'm like, what the hell? How am I supposed to bring that back up, right? I was a fat little guy, probably 2 1/4 at the time, you know. Less than I am now, but heavy for back then. So I waved to one of the guys up there, and I said, come here, like that. And he comes down and he says, help me pack this block up there. So he grabs one side, and I grab the other, and away we go up there, you know. And Bob, all of a sudden, Bob looks up, and he looks at us like, what in the hell are those guys doing? You know? And then, of course, somebody says, well, here's how you open the gooseneck, and you toss it over your back. Well, at that time, I couldn't toss over my back.
Sure.
Until, you know, it took about 4 or 5 months of doing that crap to where I could pack it up the mountain, you know. Once you start hooked in, you better be able to pack that block if you're, you know, high leading or whatever.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen if you don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how long did you work up at the camp for?
About 10 years. So I went to work, 9 years, because I went to work in 77 and then worked in 9.5 or whatever. I was laid off in October of 86, yeah.
Okay. And then what did you do after you got laid off from the camp there?
Well, I bought a log truck and went to work, got a contract for Simpson hauling on in their lowland operations. Yeah.
Okay.
So I did that until they deregulated in Washington State. When they deregulated, I got kind of pissed off about it, and I said, well, I'm not going to do this for nothing. And so I sold my truck. And I was kind of sorry about it later, but because it was still a job, but I mean, it was quite a cut, you know, about $25,000 a year right out of your pocket, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was, you know, and when I've been used to making pretty good money, and but we were okay because Marilyn and I were very frugal, and you know, we invested about every dime we made, you know, so you know,
yeah.
real estate and stuff. And anyway, so we were okay, you know. But I did that until they deregulated, whenever that was. I don't remember now what year that was when they deregulated, but so that's what, yeah.
Okay.
It was a good time.
Now, you mentioned before Chicken that worked up there at the camp.
Chicken?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said you had a story about Chicken.
Well, you know, that was not me. I heard stories about Chicken. I can't quite remember very much of them, but I'm trying to think. I remember stories about him, but I don't remember. I think he used to stand down on the logs and crow down at the boys or something, stand out on the deck. I think he was chasing. He'd crow at them all the time, you know. It's just one of these guys that's kind of
just
crazy.
a goofball, yeah.
But you had all kinds of guys like that. So it's probably one of the biggest characters we had at camp was our side rod, Jerry Berger. And Jerry would get real excited about stuff, and he'd do just crazy things. You meet Jerry on the street, or like I've golfed with him and stuff, and he was just the nicest guy and just a gentleman and just real down to earth. But when he was up there, if something went haywire, Jerry'd go kind of nuts, you know. And there was this guy, Tom Tinker, and Tom was, I don't know, he was probably like 5'10" and probably about 4 feet across, and it was all muscle. I mean, he was not, a little bit of fat, but not very much. I mean, he was like a grizzly bear. And Tom could imitate Berger perfectly. So we had the rigging shack there, and it was a great big covered area, and you'd walk up these steps, and here was this wooden floor, and there'd be chokers in there and different things, and because they made everything right there in camp, you know. And so the boys would all be standing around with their coffee. Maybe it was raining a little bit or something. So Tinker's performing. He's doing his Berger imitation. And all of a sudden, here comes Berger. And the boys just like, oh boy, this is going to be good. He walks up, and all of a sudden, Tinker says, I can feel this warm breath on my neck. He turns, he says, do you think I don't know what you're doing? He says, I got my eye on you. Berger's favorite saying, I got my eye on you, Sonny. Sonny, he'd say, I got my eye on you, Sonny. And Jerry, you could make fun of him, and he'd get mad at the second, but he'd laugh about it later.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was a great guy. One time, Tinker, they lost you know what a jack is? Like they'd hang in a tree for yeah. What do they weigh? I don't know, maybe 300 pounds, 250?
Yeah, they're heavy. Yeah.
Big old thing, like that, you know. Anyway, they lost one over the bank, and Bob says, well, get on the radio. I'll get on the radio and call the line truck up here, and we'll pull that jack up out of there. Tinker goes, oh, no, boy. He says, I'll go down and get that. And Bob says, Tinker, you can't. That's like 300 pounds or something, you know. Anyway, Tinker goes down and loads her on his back, and up he comes.
Wow.
You know, that's the kind of guy he was. That's he's just massive, you know. Pretty interesting guy.
Now, did you float around between the tower sides up there, or you pretty much stick with one?
When I was working in the brush, hook tender, whatever, I was on that side the whole time. Once in a while, I might have got called off to chase on another side or something like that. But I remember one time, fellow by the name of, can I think of his name now? Anyway, I got sent out to the side, and Ed Crawford was the hook tender, and Ed was about 6'4", and he loved to walk right up to you and look down at you like this. He wore his hard hat kind of tilted, and kind of like pretty good looking guy. He had a big mustache, and always had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. He'd walk up to you like that. Anyway, they had just set the yarder up, and it was their first road, and it was one of those deals where the carriage would, they were shotgun, the carriage would belly up before it could get to the tail end. It was just too high. You know, they couldn't go any higher right there. And they were on a ridge, and it was right there. That was as far as they could go height-wise, you know, to get, they couldn't go beyond that road, that stump there. So anyway, so somebody sends in this crazy whistles, and the yard engineer shuts off. He says, "What are they blowing?" I said, "Man, I don't, you're asking the wrong guy. I've chased very little, and I don't know. That whistle there, I've never heard it." So they tried it a couple of times, and pretty soon here comes Dick Johnson's pickup. He was over there with him. Dick Johnson was a side rod. And I thought, oh, this isn't going to be good. He's doing about 80 miles an hour down this little spur, you know. He comes sliding into the land, and he gets out, and he says, "I don't know if it's you," points at me, "or if it's you." He says, "But shit better start happening on this land." And we were like, "What do you want, Dick? We don't get it. We don't understand those whistles." He says, "I want you," and what he wanted him to do was to basically cast the carriage back. He says,
"Oh, wow.
Start it up, cable up, and let her go at the same time. And it'll just shoot it back," he says, "and then," he says, "when it hits the stump, drop it. Just before it hits the stump, drop it. And we can get the logs right below the stump, you know."
Sure.
Just bam it into there, you know, like that. And so that's what he did. And it worked, you know. But it was, I gave Dick about that, bad time about that whenever I see him. I'd say, "I don't know if it's you or if it's you." I think he felt I told him that one time. I started laughing. He says, "Well, we say some crazy things sometimes." I said, "Dick, it was good stuff. I love it. It's good storytelling."
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
So fast forward a little bit, or I guess rewind. So talk to me some about working with Ernie. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. With
sure, yeah. So Ernie Dahman. So this is my story about Ernie. So we show up here with a realtor, and all it was there was an old well out there with a concrete cap on it, and these orchards, and you could tell that had been a homestead here at one time or whatever. And so I'm looking around, and there's like nobody else around me, no other neighbors, right? And already I'm sold. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm buying this, you know, I'm buying this. So here's this old guy over here, right here, maybe 150 yards away. He's working on his Christmas trees. So he comes walking over and introduces himself, and we said, well, we're looking at this property to maybe buy. And this was his spiel. He says, well, a nice young couple like you, he says, you build a house here. He says, at that time, there were no houses on the property. Ernie had an oyster company on the salt water down there. You know, he had his oyster opening house, but they didn't live there. Nobody lived here. And it was gated. The road was gated. And he said, you guys build a house here. He says, you will have the run of my tree farm. Your kids will have the run of my tree farm. They can play and have a good time and just be like country kids, you know. And I just, you know, when we left, I told him, yeah, we'll take it. You know, we'll take it for sure. I mean, it was like paradise to us to have no neighbors. And we've never had neighbors. All these years, we've lived here 47, going on 48 years. Wow. And which I loved, you know. And now, you know, Ernie, he died, and then his sons sold everything off. And my best friend owns the 35 acres next to me now. He says, as long as you're alive, Rick, and nobody will ever build there. So I'll get to die in peace and not have to put up with so much screwy neighbors, you know. But Ernie and I became very, very close over the years. And I worked for Ernie off and on when I wasn't working up at camp, you know. I helped him build road up in the Olympics there, up on the canal, you know. Ernie, a lot of people don't realize, well, loggers do, I guess. All the guys in the canal know, but Buck Mountain, I mean, they built most of those roads up there going off into the mountains, you know, from up Hood Canal there. But he had been retired probably, I don't know, maybe a year or two, I'm not sure. And he got itchy, and he decided he wanted to go back. And they over the years, they sold most of their timber sales. They delivered the logs to Seaboard Lumber and Publishers Paper. And it was one of those guys that had bought a sale up at Merhut, up around Merhut Pass, Merhut Creek there somewhere. I don't remember now exactly where we were, but so I would go up and help Ernie with that. I'd drive dump truck, and he and a fella by the name of Kenny Bronis, who had worked for Buck Mountain. Kenny Bronis. Kenny had a lot of equipment still because he lived out on the Kenny Peninsula there. So he and Kenny went into partnerships, and they were building roads. And then, so I would go up and the first one I had been hurt logging up at Govey the first time, and so I didn't get in on the first road that he built, but the second one I did, and I would drive dump truck and haul junk away. You know, he was Pioneer, and they were making the cut through the right of way, and we'd haul dirt off and they'd load a stump on the top of the dirt, and we had a waste area and all that, you know, Forest Service, the way they set you up and all that stuff. And I remember you're supposed to leave the tailgate shut, lift her up, and dump the stump off first, and then you could trip the tailgate. And so, because you don't want the stump to get down inside, right?
Sure.
Well, I remember one time we did that, and the old front end started coming up like, ah, you know,
Oh,
and
no.
I didn't want to just slam her and let that box, you know how would it happen, just go bam.
Yeah.
You know, probably break your neck. But it didn't go all the way over, so I lucked out. You know, but it's like a lesson learned. You know.
Yeah.
Always lessons learned, and if you survive them, it's a lesson learned.
How long did you guys work up on that Merhut Creek job? And that, I'm guessing was that up Duckabush, or did you go up the Hamhama Rec Road to get there?
I think we were up the Duck. I think.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I think it was. You know, I was just there off and on.
Sure.
I was there off and on, and then, and then probably, for sure, the closest call I ever had to getting killed, Ernie and I were up there on a Saturday, and Kenny Bonus did not work weekends. He says, I don't do that. Ernie would work 7 days a week, and then while the weather was good, you know, while he could build road. And then he'd go to sell Christmas trees and then go to Mexico for the winter. So we were up there, and I was cutting right away for Ernie, and nice wood, 4 or 5 foot through, big hemlock and fir, and he says, just let them fall wherever they want to, Rick. He says, he had a TD-25, I'll kick him out of the way. Just whatever's easiest, you do that, you know. So it was really easy cutting. Anyway, I come down past Ernie on the cat, and there was a big, down there maybe 100 feet, great big cedar snag. It was probably, at least 8 feet across, and it was just a half a shell. It had been burned out over the years, and who knows how long it had been standing there, you know, the relic that it was, and it was hollow. But it was probably 80 or 90 feet tall. And he says, don't mess with that. He says, I'll push it over with a cat. And so I went on past it. And I was probably past it maybe 50, 60 feet or something like that. And it fell a pretty good size hemlock. And then I was falling a white fir, maybe 2 foot through. And I shut this off, and I was backing away. And all of a sudden I heard the cat decelerate, and Ernie started yelling at me. And I turned just in time to see that snag. Just the vibration of that cat was all it took. It was ready. It was ready to go, and it was right on top of me. And I just bailed sideways, and it just kind of touched me on the elbow was all. So Ernie saved my life on that one, you know.
Wow.
And that was the closest I ever came. But Ernie and I, over the years, I'd go to LA and sell Christmas trees with him, and I mean, we did a lot of stuff down at, you know, and he had all that waterfront down there, and so Marilyn, when the kids were little, my wife would take the kids. They'd spend the whole day down there playing in the water at the bay and stuff. And Ernie was like I don't know, like a second father to me. You know, taught me a lot about life and a lot of life lessons. You know, really a good guy. I really liked him a lot. Yeah.
That's cool. Did he share any stories with you from the Buck Mountain days?
Oh man. Ernie and his stories, and I'm never sure which ones were I know that everything Ernie did was embellished somewhat, but they were great stories. One of my favorites is he's telling about, this was when he was they were living in Quilcene, and they had the store there, and they had an office there, and all that stuff, and this guy comes in looking for Ernie one day, and so I don't know where he was. Anyway, this guy and Ernie get together, and he's some timber buyer from some company down south, and he is wanting to buy. Ernie had 40 acres out at Matlock, pretty nice timber at the time, nice second growth, you know. Hell, maybe it was old growth. I don't know. It wouldn't have been old growth. It would have been second growth. He wanted to buy that 40 acres from Ernie. And he says, well, he says, I'll have to think about it. He says, not right now. He says, if you come back a couple, 3 months, he says, you know, 4 or 5 months, he says, ask again, he says, and maybe I'll need the money and I want to sell it, you know. The old guy, okay, I'll be back. So then Ernie, though, this is Ernie's story. I love his story. So he says, that old boy planning on taking me. He figured I was going to give him that timber for nothing. He says, so I sent the boys out there and we slicked her off, he says. He says, a woodpecker would have to pack a lunch to fly across it, he says. So that old boy comes back about 4 months later. He says, yeah, he says, I decided to sell it. He says, you dropped the paperwork. And the guy says, well, I got the papers right here today. He says, we could do her, you know. And so he says, imagine his surprise when he gets out there. She's slicked.
Oh, no.
Oh, and I don't know if that
right
with her again. And then, let me see. He had one of the good hunting stories involved him and Walt Bloomfield. And they built a little homemade speeder to go on their private railroad track up at Lake Ozette. And they wanted to go in there and hunt some of those Roosevelt elk. And it was private and no trespassing and all that stuff. So they built this speeder, and they used a big McCulloch chainsaw and those little tiny steel wheels, and they loaded all their junk on this thing. And away they go in the middle of the night. They just figured, well, go up there in the middle of the night and pack her back in the woods where nobody can see it, and they can hunt and go out in the middle of the night too. So they're going along there, and Walt says, Ernie's standing up on the front of the speeder. He says, like Washington crossing the Delaware. He's got his rifle like this, and he says, he looks back, and he says, crank her up, Walt, and see what she'll do. And so Walt cranks her up. Well, he says, it wasn't very much further. And they come to a chunk that had been taken out of the railroad track, which the train wheels would go over, click and clack, but this little speeder just stopped.
Oh,
he says, and it cleaned that thing, all their gear, and Walt said, all I could see was sparks going down the track, Ernie's rifle grinding on the track, and he says, Ernie's face was all toward to hell. And that was a true story.
Wow. So
and then another time they were headed to Canada to hunt somewhere, and of course leaving after work, tired, been working all week and tired, and on a Friday night probably, and they driving along, and I forget who was driving. They'd take turns, but Walt was driving. I remember now. Ernie always wore his hard hat, and if you were driving down the road, he'd be up against the window like this, and he'd go clunk, 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 and you think, drive you nuts. You think, how the hell can he sleep like that? But he would, And many a trip to California with him that did that. Anyway, they fell asleep, and when they woke up, the pickup is up a bent over tree about 10 feet in the air. They'd hit a tree and and the trailer and everything, there they were, and kind of tore everything up. That was a real poor beginning to their hunting trip.
Wow.
But that was a true story. But
did he talk much about like Walt and Misty and them cutting for him?
Oh yeah, he loved Misty. Misty and him were good buddies too. And he talked about he and Misty would take tote goats back in behind Lake Chelan and hunt for mule deer. And he was very close to the Bloomfields, Walt and Misty especially. And another good story he told. So he says so it was. They were catching salmon out at CQ, and they were up on the canal there logging up. And anyway, he says, so I lined the cutters out. He says, I lined out the Bloomfield brothers and all this timber to cut down. He says, I got to go look at a timber sale. That's what he said. So he says, so I go home and I got the boat all loaded up in this and that and the other. And he says, Virginia was doing something. He says, I was late getting out of there. He says, so the next morning, I motoring out of CQ, and who should I meet coming in with the limit but the Bloomfield brothers? He says they were already out there. They beat me to it. They knew, they knew. And he talks about the Bloomfields. They were really into their cat hunting with their hound dogs. And if they were going to work in the morning, headed up the mountain, and a cat ran across the road, shut her down. That's it. Run back and get the dogs. We're not cutting timber today.
Wow.
And they were good at it. They'd climb the trees. They'd get their belt and spurs on and climb up and catch the kittens. The young bobcats. They'd take a gunny sack and grab by the tail and just pull the gunny like that. That's how they'd catch them. And Walt actually had one here that he raised. A cougar.
Wow, really?
And,
It'd make a decent pet?
No, the kids were never supposed to mess with the cougar when mom and dad were gone. And one time, the oldest daughter says, well, let's go feed the cougar. So Walt had a special son, and so it was Phil and the two girls, and I forget his son's name, the other boy. But anyway, they go in, and the cougar jumped toward the girls and was attacking her, right? And the special boy, he just goes over, and they're all screaming, "What do we do? What do we do? This, that." He just lets the dogs loose. That was it. The cougar's out of there. The dogs are after him, and of course they take the old cougar and tree him, And
yeah,
so
okay.
then we had to shoot the cougar, They couldn't leave him around after that.
Wow.
But
how'd the girl make out from that?
Huh?
I
don't think she got it too bad. Yeah, I know they never really talked about her being hurt really bad.
Okay.
But and I'm not sure if the cougar was full grown yet or not either.
Sure.
But yeah, that's typical of that sort of thing.
Can you think of any more of the stories from back in the Govey days? I'm sure, from way back when, there's been some stuff that's happened that you just don't ever hear about, like trucks rolling over the bank and, just kind of.
Oh, yeah,
things.
like crashes and burns, like train wrecks up there. Oh, lots of them. I remember one day it was with I don't know if you were aware of it, but they kind of got into full suspension yarding right towards the end there.
Sure.
Towards the end, full suspension yarding. And so we don't want to tear up the ground so much, So we had a burger slack line up there, up on the 1229 or something, way up above Lake Cushman there. And they were slacklining across there, and they were a long ways across, They had a lot of cable out. Well, what happened was, just by bad luck, when they retrieved the guy lines from the last unit, well, one of the guy lines, they go out and get guy lines, they just leave them there, and maybe they'd come back and get them later. Somebody take a line horse up and collect guy lines, and then take them out. We had a road where they'd string all the guy lines out, and that's all that was a guy line road. When you needed guy lines, you go get some, or a skyline extension or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, this one guy line had been through a landing fire, and they burned the landing off, and instead of just leaving it there, somebody picked it up and put it on the drum. Anyway, worst possible thing that could have happened, it got put right on the very back guy line, the exact opposite of all these lines out here. Okay?
Oh, gee. Okay.
So I'm sitting there, and it was real slow going because they couldn't wood them down because they didn't have real good tail holds, and you had all this cable in the air. There's thousands and thousands of pounds of cable. Didn't want to pull the tail holds, so they said, they'd only send in a couple of medium-sized sticks at once. And so I was hauling off that side, and you'd get two loads a day would be about it. So I'd get a newspaper in the morning, and I'd sit there. It was kind of a sprinkly, rainy day, not bad. And I'd have the truck running, keep it warm, and I was reading my newspaper. And every yard I turned, all of a sudden I heard a pow, and I look up just to see this guy line sailing over my truck like that. And I turned and looked back, and the burgers, you detach the tube, but it still had, the cables down there hooked to it. And the tube started out, and the upper guy line caught it, and it's just swung around. There was a rock face right there, and it just bananaed that thing right around, right around that rock face. And it pulled the yarder, the hoist over, about like that, and kind of put a kink to it, and the yard engineer couldn't get out of his cab. It was sprung, and he couldn't get out, and it was like a train wreck. Water, steam, and air hoses that got broke loose, and air like that, and it was quite a cool thing to be part of, really, to see. So I took my soft hammer over there and broke his window out, and he was able to crawl out the window then, And now, I will say this: Dick Johnson was our side rod. And they called in, and said, hey, they would chip the yarder over, So Dick came up there, and he was there before the rigging crew was clear on the other side. They had to go down like 5 or 6 miles, then 5 or 6 miles back up.
Wow.
So Dick comes over there. Now I had nothing but respect for Dick after this. I didn't know him real well, but at this time he says, well, the yard engineer said, I tried dumping line. He says, I tried just dumping line, and he says, you couldn't dump line fast enough, Kip. It wasn't your fault. He says, I got to take the hammer for this. I knew that guy line was bad, and I should have made sure it got put out front or just discarded it altogether. It should have never gone on the back of this yarder, you know. He says, I got to take the hammer for it. And then for a boss to do that, normally they'd be like, I don't know what happened, you know.
Right.
So Dick's got nothing but my respect for that.
Wow.
Yeah, anyway.
That's incredible.
And then, we had a swing yarder. It was like the Mark V, a Mark V. And I think if Berger made that, I think it was a Mark V Berger swing yarder. On a rubber tired carrier. It had its own carrier, self-propelled. Big old tall bugger. Anyway, the cab had a back door instead of a side door, back door, and you come out the back and then down the ladder and all this stuff. Anyway, Phil Lighthole was running it, and he was driving up this road. I forget where they were at the time. Anyway, the road just gave way. And he bailed out the back and just jumped from up there and hit the road, but down over the hill it went, and they were, I don't know, a couple of weeks getting out of there. They had to take it apart, build a road down to it first.
Oh, no.
And then take it all apart and pull it up, you know, and D8s and stuff, you know. And then another time, Jim Ritzke, our lowboy driver, Jimmy was coming off the 830 with a yarder, and I think it was the 830, and the road gave way. And luckily, the fifth wheel pin on the yarder broke and didn't take the truck with it, but the yarder, big Skagit, went down over the hill, and you know how that is. Just, you know, take it apart and start bringing it up piece by piece.
Wow.
You know? No, there was a lot of that crap happened. We still had, when I started there, we still had, I believe they were Washingtons, 2 old Washington hoists on steel wheels.
Oh, yeah.
And they would be moved with like the D8, you know. And they still rigged a wooden tree for him. They were still doing that. And that was Art Fitchett, one of our side rods. That was his thing. He loved that. He loved that. Still logging the old way, you know. And he still climbed trees and stuff. And so one of my favorite stories is when Art would get mad, he'd throw his hard hat on the ground and say, I told you guys not to do that, or something like that.
Yeah.
2 good stories about Fitchett. So one time, he's in a hurry and he thinks, well, if I take a wrap on this guy line, on this standing tree, I can just ease it down, take a wrap on a stump, you know, or maybe 2 wraps, and I can hook it to my pickup and just ease it down. And this is, you know, what's a 110-foot tree weigh? You know, I mean, probably 4 or 5 feet on the butt. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
100,000 pounds or so, you know. Anyway, shit didn't go right. And anyway, the guys that were there said, when that tree took off, when it gets to a certain point, it says, works okay at first, but then when it gets about here, you know, we're not gonna. Anyway, around that pickup went, and the door flew open, and Art went flying, broke his leg, you know.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, crazy stuff like that. That was a dandy. But my favorite story of his was Bert Wilbur was a second loader, what we called him. Oh, he worked with a shovel, and he would buck limbs, maybe, or buck broken ends, you know, or maybe a buck long stick, stuff like that. He was a Skoke Indian fellow, real nice guy. Bert, just a sweetheart of a guy. And he was on the landing, and they were loading some logs there, and they weren't yarding yet. They were going to stand one of these trees up, and the tree was laying in the ditch there, a nice, big, beautiful tree, you know. And they'd cut it right there on that unit. And anyway, Art says, do not buck that tree up. That's our spar tree. He says, don't touch that tree. And he says, I'll be back after a while. So he takes off. So Bert goes over, and he just cuts through the bark and makes these cuts every 40 feet, right? And then he gets a bunch of sawdust in his hard hat and puts piles of sawdust at the bottom.
Yeah, sure.
So Fitchett comes driving in, he's driving along. All of a sudden, he slams on the brake, and he gets out, and he throws his hat down. I told you not to buck that, you know. And I don't know what happened when they finally told him, you know, if he laughed or not. But that was a good one.
Oh, that is a good one.
That was a good one, yeah. Could you imagine? Oh, good stuff.
Tell me about when Hanley and Phillips come up to log the last of that Forest Service old growth on South Mountain.
Well, you know, I wasn't there for that. Okay. I was long gone by then. I was down to Lowlands trucking. Okay. I just know that they did that. I know they got the job for that. And I don't think there was that many units they got to log. I think what happened was I know me and some other guys were thinking about buying a yarder and a bunch of equipment. At that time it'd be about $1 million worth of debt.
Sure.
And the guy at Simpson said, we'll hire you to log up there too. And we were thinking, well, there's a lot of old growth left up there, and we thought, well, we could we would be able to stay up at Govey and log for a long time.
Oh, sure.
And come to find out, there was only just a few units, and then we'd have been cut loose, and and I didn't want to tramp around the peninsula trying to get jobs for, I didn't want to do that. I'd like to be home at night. So we didn't do it.
How much of a trek would it have been to get to South Mountain, that area in general, from down the lowlands? Because I don't even know how you'd get up that way from down here.
Oh, right out the 808. Mm-hmm. The 808, and it teed into the 800, and you'd take a left and head out that way, and it wasn't that far at all, Daniel. I doubt it might have been 15 miles, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe, but not much. Or you could also, now see, they were the fellows that Hanley and Phillips had hauling for them then. They were hauling all off highway into the sort yard. That wood was coming into the yard, and into Simpson's sort yard, so they could go whatever they wanted, 90,000 pounds if they wanted. They were hauling all off highway. But you could come out of South Mountain and you could be at Matlock in just a matter of minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just you go out there was a road off the Beeville Loop, take you right out and hit the 800 through the woods. And it was a lowland road that they built to log the lowlands,
Oh, sure.
And then you're just down there a little ways, and you could be up South Mountain and nothing flat,
Okay.
But like some of those units, I mean, we could go from Govey to Grisdale through the mountain roads that they built, the system, And I can remember coming in early and saying, "Hey, would you run over to Grisdale and pick up a such and such, and bring it back here?" And they had a flatbed Ford, probably like a 2.5 ton or something like that, flatbed Ford. So extra overtime, easy breezy. Go over there and put something on and strap her down. That way you come back, So you could do that. But there were some of the units like the 866. That was a long ways back there, a long ways, and it seemed like a long ways. It was nothing but curves the whole way. You were going in and out of these little cricks and stuff, and it was just like. And we called it. He said that they could name it that because it has 66. Blind corners on it,
Wow.
And I got in a head on there with one of my buddies one time. We come on the corner. He was loaded and I was empty. And we just hit corner to corner. Mm-hmm. And he was driving one of the old Kenworths, and I was driving one of the newer, Peterbilts. And when we hit that Peterbilt, it just flexed the frame like that, broke the transmission, the bell housing. It just... you couldn't even drive it. They had to come and tow it home. It was empty, luckily,
Wow.
And it just. But I'm trying to think. That's the only time I ever crashed my log truck into another log truck.
Yeah.
But there weren't very many log truck accidents. There was one of the things when we were learning they were teaching us to drive up there. Our lowboy driver, our boss, our truck boss, he told us, he says, if you ever get in trouble and you think your brakes are fading and you're going to lose it, he says, just run this truck into the bank. You've always got a canyon, you've always got a bank. Don't ever jump out of these trucks. Push them right into the bank and just keep pushing them. He says, they'll stop. He said, all you're going to wreck is a mirror, baby. Maybe not even a fender. They have those big military fenders, and the bumpers were like a tank, like the blade on a D8 or something. So I never had to do it, but that was really good advice, A lot of guys have jumped out of their log trucks and been killed in the process,
Okay.
Grandorf's had they were doing a logging job for Simpson up there. And they brought this young man in, and I don't know, they ran him up and down the road a few times, and said, you're good to go. First trip down the mountain, she got away from him. I don't know, who knows? I mean, we trained for 2 weeks. We had a 2-week training period. And if you didn't make it at 2 weeks, that was it. And you didn't get to go on the log truck, And I was done in the week because I had already been dinking around with trucks. I've been driving the line horse a lot and stuff at that time. So I was done in the week, but this kid, I don't know if he had maybe a day of empty truck running up and down this road, you know. And if you don't know what you're doing, and let's say you decide mid-hill that you need to shift to a lower gear, you better make sure that you can almost come to a stop before you do it, or maybe even come to a stop. Because if it starts getting away from you, now you're screwed. You can go to a higher gear, but that just gets you more trouble.
Oh gosh!
And they were wooding those trucks down. You know, they maybe packing 150,000 pounds of wood, and then the truck weighed 40-some thousand pounds. You know, so we had good brakes. I think they were like a steel ceramic, you know, and they didn't fade very easy at all, you know. And so we, but one of our deals was we should never have to, when you're running down these long hills, you know, like 12-14% long, maybe a couple miles, some of them, you know, of that. And they told us, you know, you shouldn't have to use more than 15 pounds of air pressure to keep that truck where it's at. If you're using more, you're either your brakes are out of adjustment or you're going too fast, you know. And so that was a real good rule of thumb, you know, to keep you from having something bad happen, you know.
Sure.
I saw a kid one time, I was getting loaded. There was another truck sitting there, and this new driver comes in, and he pulls up. He wanted to adjust his brakes. Well, you know, you can't have them set when you do that. Well, he pulled in, and he thought the truck was setting level, and so he let off the brakes, and it just sat there, so he thought it was okay. So he gets back there. He's under the truck adjusting brakes. Well, one of them had cammed over kind of, and it was like cammed up to where it was stuck, you know, didn't release. And when he released that brake, for the canyon, it's rolling backwards, and the other truck drivers there jumped out and bailed in and slammed on the brakes and stopped it. And he was holding on to the truck underneath, dragging along like this, you know, and that was a close one. Our boss says, always run her downhill nose first into a bank. Just run her into the bank, and then you can do what you want with it, you know. It's not going anywhere.
Wow.
So, but
now you talked to me a little bit about it before, that you hauled for Hanley and Phillips on a load or two or something like that.
Yeah, a few days when they were doing some logging for Mankey, and I remember coming into that job, and it was nice wood, but it was like logs stacked to the sky on both sides of the road down there, and it was like, wow. I mean, you know, and they'd have a string, I don't know, maybe 14 trucks or something, and of course I'd come in there, and I mean, I was meeting trucks going up the canal when I was coming to work, you know, my first day, and everything was going to Portac in Tacoma there, and so anyway, you get 2 to Portac from there, you know, and but man, those guys could produce the wood. I never saw anything like it, and I never saw that kind of production when I worked for Simpson. You know, I mean, I saw some good logging, and when they ran nice wood, they got wood out, but not where they got plugged up. I mean, to the point where they almost plugged up, where they couldn't yard anymore. You know. Those guys were right almost to that point. The wood was coming in fast and furious, you know.
Wow. Do you remember where that was they were logging
at? You know, I should have asked my buddy. He knew, because he ran shovel for him up there. He was working for Mankey's. Mankey's was logging just a little ways away. And I'm trying to think.
I know, you know,
one of those major canal roads, and I just can't remember, Daniel, which one it was, going off, you know, up under the hill.
I know they did some for Mankey on, I think, and somebody on here hopefully will comment and either straighten me out or support me on this, but I think it was either Mount Washington or Lake Jefferson Lake, somewhere up in that area.
Yeah, I just don't remember. It just seemed like it was one of the major roads you would go into, like the tourists might go into, you know, like the Ham or the Duck or something. I just can't remember now.
Yeah, it seemed like they did something up the Hama Hama Rec Road, or it was either up Jorstad Creek, kind of up in that area.
I think Bob Phillips was up there, and Mike Daniels, he was up there, I think. And they needed a lot of trucks. They had a lot of wood going out, you know. And I remember Bob Phillips. They called him Uncle Bob. And Bob he'd rolled his log truck and wrecked it.
Okay.
And, on the canal or somewhere, I think. And anyway, he was bragging about this new Peterbilt he got to Flash. We called him Flash Daniels. Mike Daniels was Flash. And he says, yeah, this new one, he says, if you tip it over, he says, it's got this special thing in the fuel tank that no fuel can leak out. And Flash says, well, that's a good thing for you, Bob. And of course, Bob, you know what he said.
Yeah,
you know, to Flash, you know. And he thought that was pretty nice. He said, we can roll over and we won't have a fuel spill.
Now, okay, so Rick, did you, when you got into your own log truck, were you kind of seagulling around, or did you, for the most part, do Simpson work?
No, there was 3 of us guys, myself and Jim Whiting and Miles Gordon, and we were on what was called at that time the Hahn side, and they had a Hahn tree harvester and a Komatsu grapple cat and some kind of a rubber tired grapple skidder. I forget what it was. And so they bring the trees, piles of, they just cut everything full length, you know. They had a shear at that time, or I think Bob Nichols was running their feller buncher. So they'd bunch them into piles, and then the cat would, and the skidder would bring in these piles, and then the Hahn, I don't know, have you ever worked around a Hahn at all? Yeah. Okay, so the Hahn would pick a tree up and put it in its thing, and they'd run it down and delimit and cut it to length and all that stuff, and then kick it off to the side. And the shovel operator, he'd just sort from whatever got kicked off to the side. But you had to, the Hahn was, it was right there. I mean, you didn't move it a lot, you know. You tried to, you know, you might turn it on the landing to wherever the wood was coming from, but it was self-propelled, but kind of archaic compared to the dangle heads they have nowadays, you know. Yeah. And so anyway, that was a side I was on until I quit. Yeah, I was on that side the whole time, pretty much. Yeah.
So when did you get out of it? When? Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I think it was 96, I think. Okay. I think it was 96. Whenever state of Washington deregulated trucking, and I got pissed off, and I know I was going to lose about $25,000 a year, and of course, prices kept going up, and everything, fuel was going up, and tires, and all your, you know, all the work you had to do on your truck, everything cost more. But then all of a sudden, to take a $25,000 cut off the top, I got a wild hair and said, you know, screw you, I'm out of here, you know. Yeah. And I kind of regretted it later, but what the hell. And then Jim Whiting quit too. He quit. He's like, you know, he didn't want to do it for nothing either. I think he went driving dump truck for some of the boys, you know. Jim liked trucking, and so he drove dump truck. Miles Gordon worked with them up until the very end, which was just, I don't know, what, 5 or 6 years ago. Okay. And then they made a kind of a change things over, and when they started dropping logging size, they cut way back on the amount of logging size they had, and then so they had an association. All these boys that had come out of the high country, and some of the others from the lowlands formed an association at one point, and this was after I quit, and they bought you paid $500 and you got a membership into this association, and so you could sell your spot with your truck. You could do that, and whoever, if the other guys agreed that this guy's okay to have. If they didn't like the guy, if he was an asshole or something, well, then you couldn't sell your truck to him, you know, or your spot anyway. But that didn't happen very often. If a guy had the money, they could usually do that. But Miles stayed there until they, I don't know, a few years ago when they kind of redid things, and then Scott Vesey came in and bid a little bit cheaper, and so Vesey does most of their trucking now, you know. And the company has a few, I think they got 2 or 3 of their own log trucks now. They went, for a long time there, they didn't have any, and now they have 2 or 3 new Kenworths now. And so I think they got a couple of long orders and a mule train maybe. But Miles went to work for, so one of our buddies that worked up at camp and again in the lowlands was can't think of their name. Anyway, his boy John Starks was, him and his old man were loggers from, I think, around up north somewhere. And Johnny he had all the dangle heads working for Simpson. He had like 4, 5, 6 dangle heads.
Oh yeah.
Contracted to Simpson, and he had a log inside. Had down around here some. Oh, and it was up. I think it was up around up north, kind of north over towards the floating bridge in that country. Yeah. I'm not sure who they logged for. Anyway, he sold his outfit to McClanahan, Jesse McClanahan.
Yeah.
And you know Jesse, yeah. And so I think Miles is still hauling for him. I don't think he's retired yet.
Yeah, I see him on the road now and again. Yeah.
So he stayed there, but that was, our shovel operator that loaded us on the Hon. He got tired of running a shovel. It was hard on his back, and he went to work for one of these fiber optic companies, installing fiber optics or something. And he's retired now. Everybody's retired now. His Ernie's nephew, Fred Dahman. Now he was Otis's boy, I think. Otis got killed falling timber up there at Buck Mountain. Fred's boy ran shovel till he retired. He loaded up at camp, and then he loaded down here a little bit, but he mostly shovel logged down here. That's what his deal was. He was a good shovel logger. He was really good at it. He could make a lot of money. And a lot of those guys came down out of the high country. And, for a lot of guys, I mean, here's the deal. You're running the big old beast of a cable heel boom, and now you come down there and you got a really fast hydraulic machine, and you got about 10 different sorts. And some of the guys just said, no thanks. I'm not doing that.
Went from camp run to the sorts, and they're done with
anything. Yeah, everything went together. Yeah, and then to come down here and have all these sorts, and then and it was pretty strict down here. So if you started getting your sorts mixed up, they come, hey, what are you doing here? If you got to, have the truck driver measure that top. Swing the top around to him, he'll measure it. And we did that a lot. We'd jump out and either point to the truck or point away. Whatever they were loading. And stuff like that, and like oversize, he'd think, well, I've got an oversized butt here, so he'd swing it around to you, and because it would be maybe within an inch or two,
Sure.
And I don't remember what it was now. I think it was anything over 32, maybe, something like that. And couldn't go to mill 3, so it would be oversized. Either go to Busey and Everett, or down to, at that time we were hauling everything into Warrenton, Oregon, the big Hemlock,
Wow.
And so it was. I liked going to Warrenton. That was a nice haul, going down, go out and take off from McCleary, cut across and hit 101 right there by the Arctic,
Yeah.
And on down to Warrenton. That was I enjoyed that. And then up at then one of the other things they did was when we went out into the Wynoochee country, they did what they called a reload, and so. They would bring the rail cars up there, and we would haul off highway a lot into the reload, and they put it on the rail cars, and and you could haul as much weight as you wanted. Nobody cared up there, and so that was interesting. It wasn't I don't know. You got a lot of loads per day that way, but it wasn't quite as profitable because they cut the rate at 22% when you're off highway, and so it wasn't. That's why you load up to kind of make the difference, But then towards the end, they quit. They were having trouble with their railroad. The trains were derailing a lot, and they just thought it's going to cost too much to upkeep. And I think by then Ralph had retired. Ralph Cook, who was running it, and he had done a really good job. And so they just shut the railroad down, and we started hauling everything out to the highway, And,
wow.
But you get back there on what they call the 7400. You go up past Grisdale and take a left and go over and cross the Wynoochee Dam there and go out that way out onto the Donkey Creek Road. And then go up the Donkey Creek, not too far past the dam, and you take a left onto the 7400. And that would go all the way through that whole country, and the 74 and all the spur roads, all the way and right onto the back side of the Donovan, Warehouser's Donovan, okay, Donovan Creek, what they called the Donovan. So we were, and actually you could, if we went to Aberdeen, we'd sneak in the back way from Warehouser's property into the Donovan and come. We weren't supposed to, but man, it's like you cut off 40 minutes on your trip, and you get back and get an extra trip, So whatever it took, cheat like crazy if you could get away with it until you got caught. Or we'd come up Donkey Creek, which was way closer than going back up to Wainuchi and all the way back around. And we weren't supposed to come up Donkey Creek empty because we didn't have a permit, but we were empty. But we'd do that too all the time, you know, whatever it took. And all my whole time, and I've run a lot of overweight loads. And Gary Bacon, was it Bacon? What was his name? The Wayman. I love him. Nice guy. Not Gary Bacon. Anyway, he was really nice to us. He didn't harass us too much. He went all over the country. But anyway, I deserved a lot of overweight tickets in my time. But I only got one in my whole life, and I thought I was completely legal. And what happened was, that truck, I had a T800 Kenworth that I was driving for my K-Son at the time, and I had a new T800, beautiful truck. But that truck, if you were low on fuel and you loaded the truck up to 46,000, you know, it would actually put more weight on the drivers. You'd only get maybe 11 on the steer, and it was a weird thing. You get 35 on the drivers. And so I loaded her up to 80,000. This is how I found out. And I got pulled into the Arctic scales there, you know. And pretty soon the guy, you know, does his thing. Pretty soon, you know, park and bring papers. Oh, what's going on, you know? Because I know I'm good, you know. He says, you're 1,000 over on the drivers. I said, that's impossible. I said, I said, these scales, I had what's the best scales they make?
Oh, they've got, well, they have size and then, or SI and then,
the best ones were, and they were bulletproof. I'm trying to think of the name of them. Anyway, everybody will know what I'm talking
Vulcan.
about. Vulcans, thank you.
Yeah.
Vulcans. I had Vulcans, and they were spot on all the time. And so he says, well, and he was a nice guy, and he actually took out his jump scales. He says, well, let's try these. I said, I think your scales are screwed up. Put him on the jump scales. Yeah, it was 1,000 pounds over. The only weight check I ever got, and I thought I was totally legal.
Isn't that something else?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, yeah.
What, okay. You've met a lot of people. You talked to a lot of people.
Yeah.
What's the best advice you ever got from anybody as far as working out in the woods, or, I mean, anything in general?
Well, like I say, Ernie Dahman was my mentor, and Ernie gave me a lot of good advice. Now, one of them that I remember I really like, he says, Rick, he says, how do you know that right now today you're not making the most money that you will ever make in your life? And he says, you better put some aside. He says, because tomorrow you'll be making who knows what, maybe half of that or something. And I listened to Ernie. You know, a lot of, you know, I've got people in my life that they just don't listen, you know. But I listened to Ernie, and I thought, well, I took that advice. Ernie was very successful, you know. Had 3/4 of a mile of Totten Inlet clam and oyster ground, had 400 or 500 acres here, beautiful, you know, all this stuff. And anyway, he was very successful. And so I did that. When I was making money, I always put as much as I could possibly afford aside. And I bought 40 acres from Ernie when he needed some money in his old age. And I bought 40 acres from him at a good price, I thought, a very fair price. You know, invest a little bit in the stock market and mutual funds and things, but that was good advice. Always, you know, he says, how do you know that right now today? And I told my son that, and he lives by that. He's very, very, very good at saving money. And I said, right now you're doing really well financially, I said. But it's been my experience, Daniel, that when everything's wonderful, change is coming. When we were trucking down there, making $500 every day and burning, 30 gallons of fuel, driving 120 miles a day, and I thought, like I told you earlier, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Well, guess what? 8 or 9 or 10 years later, it all changed. You know, so when everything's wonderful, you can bet somebody's going to try and make it unwonderful. Especially government agencies.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. When was the last time the government did anything that made my heart burst with joy?
And you're thinking,
Never.
Yeah.
Never. Anyway, yeah. I'm trying to think as far as like, you know, when I was setting chokers and the rig and slinger says, now you stay behind me all the time. You know, and I didn't know where to go. He says, we come out here, he says, I'm the guy that's closest to the turn. He says, you're always going to be back behind me, 10, 15 feet. He says, you'll be safe if you're that far behind me. One time, we had a turn right below the road. It was just dog hair timber, little stuff. And me and the other truckman were back against the bank. And the rigging slinger, he was standing about, maybe 2/3 of the way across the road, where he could just he couldn't peek over the bank, but he was kind of close. You want to keep an eye on things. And they went around on that turn. It was the darndest thing I ever saw. This whip, it was just a whip that shouldn't even been down there, comes up and just goes, just like that, just swept the road. And he had his back, it come around behind him and just flipped him up in the air like that. Hit him right in the back of the legs and flipped him. Didn't break anything, just made him real sore, you know.
Wow.
But, you know, we all thought he was completely in the clear, you know. The turn was down below the road. How it jumped up there and did that and swept. It didn't come up like this. It come up and then went level. It's just like crazy stuff, you know. You never know.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's the thing that you miss the most about working in the woods?
I loved tendon hook, and I loved those big yarders, and I loved that high country logging. You know, I mean, that was something that I got to experience that, well, people around here will probably never see again. Up in the Olympic Mountains, logging old growth, big wood, steep ground, you know, big old Skagit yarders, and you'd be back there at the stump, and you'd change roads, and maybe some of your hay wire got underneath the cut timber, and when they cabled up, here'd be 3 foot through 40-foot logs just flying in the air like toothpicks, you know. And then the old stump, and you know, and he'd cable up and make sure he couldn't pull the stump. He'd go like that for a few seconds, you know, before he finally stopped it, you know. But that old stump would shake and just, you know, the vibration of the ground, and lots of power, lots of violence, you know. And it was, for a young guy, it was quite wonderful, you know. For a young guy, it was a wonderful job, and those were my kind of people. You know, I am not a civilized human being, and they were, and you know, I may not be as crazy as some, but that they're all the characters, you know, the characters that we worked with, they made it what it is, you know. If it had been like working in the office, well, I wouldn't have been there, you know. I had the choice to go down to the mill, you know. I said, no thanks. I took my severance check and put it on a down payment for the log truck, you know. And we all got a severance check, you know, so you could do what you wanted with it. And mine went to the log truck.
Out of, you know, with that being said, what would you say the worst part about working in the woods was? Well, it depended enough if it was just when I was in the brush, you know, when I was in the brush. Oh, maybe having to log in the snow. The snow would transfer the cold through your corks up into your feet, you know. It was vicious. Rainy days, not so bad, you know. I mean, come lunchtime, you'd build a fire. You'd grab some pitch on the way down somewhere and build a nice fire, you know, and eat your lunch real quick and then take a nap by the fire before you had to start working again. You know, if in the summertime when it was really hot and it was like, you know, 85 degrees or something, I'm a sweater. I sweat a lot, so I could never keep enough water in me. I'd be blow for the water bags. I need water, you know. I went through a lot of water, and probably more than the other guys, but it still wasn't bad. It wasn't bad, you know. It was still, I mean, in the summertime you're out there and that freshly down timber, and you know how it is when it's baking in the sun, you can smell that pitch, Daniel. And it's just like, those are things that I loved that high country logging, I did. And the high country log trucking. And when I first went down in the lowlands with my own log truck, it was fun. But then I was so glad to get out of log trucking when I quit 12 years ago. Let me see, I tore a rotator cuff, and I had to take about a year off, and I thought, I'm just not going back to work after this. I was 59 when it happened. I quit when I was 60, and by that time, they were getting a lot of wood going up to Busey and Everett. And if you were like some of the first trucks you get to Busey, well, let me tell you, buddy, I'd rather get kicked in the nuts than do that. Than go to Busey. You come out of there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not getting home till 7, maybe 8 o'clock at night. It's just stop and go all the way down that. It's a shithole up there. Nowadays, I don't go north into the Squally River.
unless it's a life and death thing. But some relatives fly in and want me to pick them up at the airport. I said, sorry, you're asking the wrong guy. You can rent a car. They all have enough money. They can rent a car. You know, I don't do it. Going south now, I told a guy one time, I said, if I could get 2 to Vista every day, Columbia Vista. Have you ever been there?
No.
So you go down to Vancouver, hang a left to go along the river, just a couple, 3 miles, and they had a mill there, and they cut. You took in the really premium wood, and they cut transmission timbers for like the big poles, and they had to be knot free, see, because they got to have the strength to hold all these lines, and anything to do with the electrical business had to be free of knots. And so anyway, I said I could take 2 to Vista every day for the rest of my life. I liked it. You'd put that thing on cruise, hit I-5, and quite often never take it off. You know, it'd go over the hills by itself. You'd just go down there. It was easy breezy. You know?
Wow.
Yeah. Good job. I like that down there. But going north was just
a nightmare.
Yeah. But anyway.
Do you have any advice you could impart on a young person that maybe is interested in getting involved in the timber industry in some aspect or another?
Well, you know, the thing of it is, I don't care, even as logging has progressed, and we have tethering now and all kinds of things, and guys can make a good living, I think, running a piece of equipment. The bottom line is, if you're a logger, you better plan on working long hours, because let's say you're running the Danglehead, say, somewhere. You're going to, maybe it's an hour and a half from your home. You never know, you know. And I suppose if you work for like Weyerhaeuser or something, you know, a big company like that, that would be different. I don't know how you have a camp. Weyerhaeuser has their camps, you know, and that would be good because you'd be home every night at a decent hour. You know, they quit and come in and you pop in your car and go home. PL and stuff, and I hauled for them quite a bit. And I like the PL boys; they were a good bunch. But if you're running somebody's piece of equipment, working for a Jippo, you're going to tramp all over the peninsula, or who knows? I mean, all over Washington State, and that's a rough deal. If you're married with children, it's a bad deal, I think. And I don't know what wages are now, but I know that when I quit, loggers weren't making enough. They were not. And that was another thing. You know, we were putting in pretty much 14-hour days, you know, 12 being an easy day. And those guys would make $60,000 a year. You know, that's not enough. You know, that's for those kind of hours.
Yeah.
You know, some of the kids nowadays are making a couple $100,000 a year doing other stuff, you know. And you got to be able to get out of bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, you know. And I still do. I'm still up at usually 3:30, 4 o'clock every morning, just because I haven't been able to break that habit, you know. But if you don't like if you like basically having your own office, you're sitting in a truck or a Danglehead or maybe a log loader or a yarder, whatever you're sitting in, that's your little workspace in your office, and you know, you don't really have to have someone right next to you looking over your shoulder, breathing over your shoulder. All you got to do is your job. And that's one thing I'll say about camp. We were up there, as long as you showed up for work every day and just did your job, nothing out of the ordinary, just did your job, you were golden. You were golden. And then if you screwed up and like something happened bad, broke something, you know, no big deal. This guy, he's a good man. He's here every day. He does a good job. Shit happens, you know. And I remember one of my friends, he worked construction up at Grisdale. He says, the first time I got on a piece of equipment, they said, hop on that Euclid. It's one of those earth mover scraper things. Sure. Hop on the Euc and take her up to this road here. He says, so I'm bombing out of camp down the main line. He says, I get her going pretty good. I'm doing about 35. He says, that son of a bitch started doing this.
Oh,
pretty
no.
soon, he says, I'm off in the ditch.
Oh, no.
And he says, and you look around like this to see, did anybody see me? Nope. Pull her out of the ditch, away you go, you know. And that's the way it was. If you could, you know, I remember one time I was coming down. I was the only truck hauling up there, and right at the bottom of this hill, you come down off the steep part, and you hit this little flat. And here was this big chuck hole. It's really deep. And I thought, man, I'm going to break an axle on that thing. And you didn't want to slow down because that's just the way it was, you know. So I kept edging out a little bit more towards the ditch, a little bit more towards the ditch. And finally I edged out far enough to where she just kind of goes, whoop. Oh. And it didn't lay up against the bank. it just sat there, and the drive wheels had no traction, you know. So there I sat. So I was maybe a quarter of a mile from the main line. So I walk out to the main line, just barely get out there, and here comes Dick Johnson, and the low boy is right behind him, empty. I flagged Dick down. I said, oh, I fucked up, Dick. So he runs up there and says, oh yeah, you know, yeah, not a problem. He says, Jim, run back and get that D8 sitting in camp. So Jim runs back and gets the D8, and they bring her out, and they hop her off the low boy. He says, now Rick, he says, you take the bull line, you climb up there, and we'll wrap this load. And it was just easy. Mm-hmm. We just choked the whole load with the bull line there. He just picked it up with the cat, and he starts walking, and I start driving, and we just walked right back onto the road.
Wow.
And he never a cross word to me. Just the fact that instead of sitting there collecting overtime, I came out and found somebody, and I was golden, and it was okay. That's the way they were, you know. Good bunch of guys to work for. But as far as young guys, I don't know. It's I've been out of it too long, and I think they, you know, to get a piece of equipment, and I know there's guys that they looking for people. If you're willing to go to work every day, it's just like up there. I think you'd be golden. Go to work every day and run the, you know, like a lot of times the processor guys, geez, they'd be there an hour before the loaders were, and they'd be processing logs, you know, and then a lot of times they might have to leave early to go get changed, you know, drop them off at the saw shop, pick up pieces of, you know, stuff for their, because they kind of took care of their own machines somewhat, you know. And yeah, I don't know, you know, it's hard to say. It takes a special kid, I think, you know, that's willing to do that. That's willing to spend those kind of hours. Get up that early, put in a 12-hour day, maybe, you know. And if you're in a truck, I think you're going to put in a 12-hour day, pretty much, you know. Wouldn't you think?
At least.
Yeah.
It seems like the minimum.
If you want to make any money.
Yeah. Seems like the minimum is a 12-hour day, and then
that's
it goes
the minimum.
from there. Yeah.
And I always worked for, you know, when I was driving for other guys, I worked after eventually I went to work for, well, I worked at the pole yard, worked at the Shelton Pole. That was a pole yard we had up here for about, 2 years maybe, I think. Anyway, maybe 3 at the most. Anyway, but I didn't like being stuck in the yard. I thought, well, it was a good job, you know, I got paid well and good outfit, good guy to work for. But I wanted to be back in that log truck. I wanted to be out in the woods, you know. So I went to work for Ken McKay, and he had a spot with a company, and he had kind of retired. His wife had passed away, and he just didn't have it. He just didn't care anymore, you know, about that sort of thing. So I talked to him. I said, hey, I'd be willing to drive your truck for the company. So he said, okay, yeah. So I did that. And I don't know where I was going with that now, but, you know, well, nowadays, I mean, if you're going to drive a truck, if a kid wants to do that, geez, you got to go to a trucking school. You can't just say, well, I've been doing it and pass and go out and take the test. You can't do that. You know, you got to pay a bunch of money to do that, you know. But I remember we have across the freeway, my buddy owns some property that borders Green Diamonds. And so we have a 5-mile loop that we try to hike Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And it goes up on top of the mountain and back down in just a big loop. And one of the Simpsons guys that does right away and works for Simpson, and he has some equipment up there. They were widening the road because they were going to log this unit up there, 120 acres. I said, is that your processor up there, your Dingleton? He says, yeah. He says, you want a job running it? Just like that, you know. He knew I was a logger. He said, you want a job running this? Oh, no, thank you. I'm happy being retired. That's one thing. I don't miss working. You know, I loved it when I was there, and I loved it at certain times. I loved it. But the freedom of being retired is pretty sweet. You know, so anyway, a lot of my friends, the construction guys, went to work for Mason County. A lot of them got on with Mason County, yeah, and quite a few of them actually, and finished their years out there. You know, most of them all those guys are retired now. You know,
so retirement's that fun. If a guy can get a decent logging job out there that makes enough to put away for retirement, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, you know, that's the biggest piece of advice I give to a young person is save some money. Save some money. If you make $1,000 try to save 10% of your money. And I know it's hard. It's hard nowadays. I mean, a young couple trying to buy a house, and you know, don't think that you got to have brand new diesel pickups. You don't need boats. You don't need things that are just going to take your money away from you. And because I can guarantee you, someday you're going to want to climb out of that piece of equipment. And you know, I'm not rich, but I'm certainly comfortable, and it's because I saved really hard. I was very frugal. I can remember one of my favorite sayings was back when we were building this house and I was logging, you know, and stuff. And I said, we'd drink Craigmont Pop. And I said, boys, when I can afford to buy Pepsi, I says, I will have arrived. You know? And now I drink Pepsi every day if I want it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Craigmont, Safeway Craigmont, you know. I mean, we are tight-fisted with the buck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here you are living comfortably, and you don't have to worry about a whole lot, do you?
Yeah. Well, and this is, you know, the thing that really set us up, Daniel, was we built this house and paid cash as we went. We never had a mortgage. And all that money that would have went for house payments got invested, you know. And I would tell kids, you know, if you can, go take some classes and learn how to do it, and build your own house. And you can do the framing and the sheathing and all that stuff. Yeah. And you hire an electrician, and you hire a plumber, you know. You hire a masonry guy to put the foundation in. But the wood part is easy. I mean, it just takes time, you know.
Sure.
And I mean, when you think about the money you'd save, you could afford to quit a shitty job and do it, you know, and do it. But I know my son, he had a Highline home built, and he saved a ton of money, a ton, you know, just to, you have to do some of the work. That's the way to go too. But that's the hardest thing. I told my grandkids, they were here the other day, and they're, he's 21, and then sister's 18 and 16. And I said, you know, I don't know that you guys will ever be able to afford a home the way things are. Because, you know, unless you have some really good job, it's going to be tough. I mean, let's face it, even starter homes, they probably want $250,000 for now.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Yeah, and so I don't know.
Well, Rick, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and share some of these stories and your life story.
Yeah, anytime, Daniel. It was a pleasure. Yeah.